Beaming to your device directly from Dr. Frankenstein's Extension Laboratory, somewhere in Southern California, it's the Hollywood Horror Nerds, your number one source for news, speculation, and discussion exclusively for Universal Studios Hollywood's Halloween Horror Nights. And now to your hosts, Undead Ed and Dr. Frankenstein's unpaid graduate student, Alvaro Stein.
Welcome everyone to the New Year, New Me episodes 1 of 2024.
It's good to be back. We're getting this in again, kind of right under the wire for January. We wanted it out earlier, but we were swept away by plague, I'm afraid, for most of this month.
Unfortunately, that is true. And now we're back, and it's great.
We're back. We're feeling good. No one's throat's on fire for the first time in a few weeks, and we're ready to talk once again about our favorite topic, which of course is Halloween Horror Nights.
Yes, I'm very excited to see what new speculations and things we can talk to you guys about today.
So unlike the previous two episodes, which have primarily been kind of looking back at past mazes and past events, this one we're going to be talking almost exclusively about the 2024 event that's going to be coming up this year. We're going to be going through, we think there's going to be the same amount of mazes as in previous years, which will be 8 again, plus the Terror Tram, plus a few shows. And we've both prepared our own separate speculation lists. So using what clues are out there and kind of our own intuition, we have concepts for 8 mazes each. We're going to talk about them. We're going to tell you why we think this might be coming and what we think it might look like if it does.
Yes, so let us get started.
Well, first, we actually have a little bit of news to talk about. So this is also kind of a news segment on the podcast, talking about events that are either occurring in the entertainment world or within the park that could have a bearing on Halloween Horror Nights. So there's 3 topics we're going to get through. Well, really, yeah, no, there's 3. Thank you. My notes are a little unorganized. I wrote them all last night. So the first thing that came out, this came out, I think might have been end of December or very early in January. That caused a bit of a buzz in the Halloween Horror Nights community. We're just going to talk about it now. Is the director of the Terrifier movies. As an Italian guy, he is campaigning for that franchise to come to Halloween Horror Nights. If you don't know what Terrifier is, it's been 2 movies now. It stars, forgive me, I don't know the actor's name, but the character is Art the Clown. He has kind of this black and white makeup, and he terrorizes, his victims. Pretty basic slasher fare, but they're known for being over the top in terms of violence and gore effects.
Yes, I definitely have heard about this. He seems to be a big fan of Hollywood Horror Nights, so his campaign could hopefully be fruitful. However, for those of you who have seen Terrifier, it's pretty gory.
Yeah, I've never actually seen it all the way through. I've seen parts of the first one. I haven't seen the second one. I remember the first one, it opens as a pretty chilling sequence where they go to like a burger shop or something and the clown's there. And that's actually very effective in terms of just creating kind of sense of dread. It's a very creepy costume. It's well acted. And it just builds slowly for like 30 minutes. And then when the killing starts, I got kind of turned off because it was very over the top to the point like, okay, this is just silly. We won't describe what it does on air because, if you can almost spoil it. If you're into a super gory slasher movie, this is right up your alley. If you get a little turned off by the extreme gore, like if you love all the Saw sequels and you loved Hostel, you'll love Terrifier. If that's not your kind of thing, you just like slashers, but not for that element, I would stay away. And I feel like in later years, especially more recently, they've been trying to tone that element down, it feels like, in Horror Nights. They don't want to go for something more controversial like that. And these movies are controversial because of that gore element. Specifically, there's complaints that it feels targeted towards women in the community. I haven't seen the film, so I'm not going to comment on that myself, but that is the sentiment that's out there. So it does feel like it is a bit of a more controversial movie than what they've been taking recently, especially. They've been trying to tone anything like that down at the event. So I don't think it's very likely. I think that's I didn't put it in my speculation list. Maybe Dr. Alvaro Stein did. But that's where we are with that. Do you have any more comments on Terrifier?
I will say that whatever it may come, if it comes, it'll be. I can't be. I can't say too much about how they would implement it. However, I would say that I would hope that they would tone down all the red
Yeah,
gore.
I mean, Halloween Horror Nights. I don't want it to be like a not gory event. I mean, last year in the Chucky maze, he did have someone sawed in half, which is also something that happens in these Terrifier movies. But in the movie, it's presented in such a way that it's much more disturbing than it was in the maze
Yeah.
itself. The way that it's done. If you're into it, then you go watch the movie. You'll oh, that's incredible. If you're not into it, you've already turned off this part of the discussion. You skipped ahead.
Or if you have coulrophobia, which is the fear of clowns.
Yeah, I would say something that we might see from this would be instead of a full experience, they might do like a photo op where you're going to take a picture with Art the Clown because it is a great scary makeup. And if it's just the character and maybe some blood splatter on him, that's not going to really offend anyone, I don't think.
No, if anything, it'd be similar to how they did it with Blumhouse last year,
Right.
where it was basically just a photo op with the.
They had one with David Pumpkins and the Bride of Frankenstein last year, and they also had one if you were a VIP. They had one with a grabber from the Black Phone.
The
Something
black
like
phone.
that, I think,
Yeah,
could be popular and kind of. I think it might that might satisfy both camps.
yeah. I think that way they could still have Terrifier without actually having
Right,
Terrifier.
right. You dodge these more controversial aspects of the
Yeah.
film. So that's our first news item. Next up on the bulletin is a social media post that Bloomhouse put out. So if you don't know, Bloomhouse, they produce a lot of cheap horror movies, and they're also quite popular at Halloween Horror Nights. I think for 2 or 3 years now, they've had these horror Bloomhouse movies, but they're just 2 or 3 movies that Bloomhouse released that aren't really big enough to have their own maze, but they get stuck in as kind of 2 or 3 movies back to back. They produced what have been Megan was big last year, Five Nights at Freddy's, The Black Phone, all the Halloween remakes of the last few years were all Blumhouse, so they do a lot.
Hmm.
The movies, I mean, they vary in quality. Some are good, they hit and they miss, but they're a big Halloween horror presence. And on their social media, they put out a post pretty early in the year that was kind of their to-do list for 2024. And some of it was promoting their movies. It's like go to see Megan 2.0, but also one of them was go to Halloween Horror Nights. So if you didn't think they were coming to Halloween Horror Nights this year, they almost certainly are.
Yes. Now it's going to be now a discussion of which movie if they decide to focus on a movie. My hot take is it's probably going to be Five Nights at Freddy's.
Well, now you're jumping ahead. As we're going to cover this in the speculation portion. This is just the news. Or
Ah,
this is just the news, or strictly news.
okay.
That's all. I don't have much to say. I mean, I always kind of expected they would come. Spoiler, I also expected it would be Five Nights at Freddy's. It seems
Yeah.
like a slam dunk. We'll get to it in a minute. But that was it for that. The last news item that's actually quite interesting in terms of entertainment news is we just talked about Bloomhouse, and Bloomhouse is actually merging with James Wan's Atomic Monster production house. So if you don't know James Wan and Atomic Monster, James Wan I think is one of the more underrated filmmakers in Hollywood today in terms of the general public's knowledge of him because he's produced just hit after hit. This guy's unstoppable. He entered the scene with Saw. That was his first film that really got
Mm.
out there. And I mean, that blew up on a shoestring budget. And then, not satisfied with having one horror franchise that ruled Hollywood, he then went on to create the Conjuring universe. And in between, he's produced stuff like *Malignant*, which didn't do that well, but I thought was genius. I love *Malignant*. It was a great. If you're into like a more of a campy, fun slasher movie, *Malignant* was fantastic. He's also made the Aquaman films. Those were kind of his big budget superhero movies, and they did rather well. I haven't seen them, but they did do better than most superhero movies that came out this year. So of course, Bloomhouse, we just said, has been a big presence at the event. Atomic Monster, much less so. Or we do get Saw mazes a lot. We haven't had a Conjuring maze, and these other properties haven't come to the event. And the feeling is now that they're together, if Jason Blum, who runs Bloomhouse, starts talking to James Wan, he's like, "Hey, I really love using Halloween Horror Nights as a kind of a conduit to promote my movies. Why don't we use it for some of our joint
Hmm.
productions?" We could see an uptick in more Saw mazes. We could see some Conjuring mazes might start to come. Just more stuff coming from the studio that hasn't had such a big presence at Hollywood Horror Nights in the past.
Well, if we start seeing more Saw mazes, then Terrifier might actually be able to be a bit more of a possibility because, from what I
Saw
understand,
somehow is
Saw
not as controversial as Terrifier for
it's
whatever reasons.
it's not as controversial, but it's still a lot of it's very gory.
It is. It is. But it's not, it's presented differently, I think, in Saw. In Saw, it's always presented always in the frame of the victim kind of deserves it. Because they're always like, oh, Jigsaw comes like, you've been a bad person. Now we're going to play a game to fix you. And in Terrifier, it's just gratuitous violence for violence's sake against the innocent.
That is true. So their whole idea of why they're doing it is
Right.
different.
Jigsaw has a motivation.
Mm.
And actually, the first Saw movie is actually quite good in terms of plot.
Mm.
If you haven't seen Saw, you've just been turned off from the gore. The first movie is a lot less gore than you would expect because it was made on such a low budget that they always cut away before they show anything. It's a bit like Psycho, where you never actually see the knife stabbing Janet Leigh. Saw is the same thing. You never actually see them doing anything insanely gory. Maybe for like one, there's one small moment. And the plot and the plot twists are actually really good, and the acting's good. It has I don't want to pronounce the guy's last name, but Cary Ewells, I think, and he was the Dread Pirate Roberts in The Princess Bride. So
No,
funny place for him to pop up, but also had Ben from Lost. So it had some good actors. Had Danny Glover. If you've never seen that one, I recommend it.
I remember when this movie came out, it was I was around 10 years old. I was strictly not allowed to
Yeah,
see
we were
this.
too young when it came out.
Eh,
That's it. Those are my three news items, and we'll keep following all these stories actually, because they either will or will not become the event. And if they do, you heard it here first.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
this is why we're your number one source for news and speculation, because we get it to you first.
For Hollywood, not
Not for
Florida.
Hollywood, only the Hollywood. And I think that's going to do it for our news portion. So we'll move right into the meat of today's episode, which of course is our 2024 speculation. So, like I said at the top of the episode, we each have 8 mazes, and then we'll touch on what we think we'll see in terms of shows, scare zones, and terror tram as well.
Mhm.
So why don't what we'll do it like this? I'll say my number one maze.
Mm,
If you also have that, I'm now mine are not ranked in terms of most likely to least likely. I just kind of have a list.
same with me.
Okay, good.
All
So
right.
I'll say what I have listed first. If you have the same maze, because I think there may be one or two in here that we do actually have the same thoughts on, but we haven't shared these lists before just now. Um,
Makes it more exciting this way.
Yeah. So if we have the same one, then we'll talk about it at the same time. Otherwise, you can give comments on mine, I'll give comments on yours, and we'll bounce back and forth.
Sounds like a plan.
So a little precursor to why we've speculated, some of what we've speculated. We've talked about him before, John Murdy, who directs this event. He likes to tease us on Twitter. He puts out these little clues about, oh, I just finished designing this maze, and here are 5 things that I had to research to learn about this maze. And there's only really 2 mazes that well, 2 or 3 that he's put out decent clues for so far. And I've tried to piece those together to make 3 guesses at least. And the other guesses are based more on what we think would be make sense business wise for the event. So with that intro, the first clue I was trying to interpret from John Murdy, he said he researched 4 things. He had borax, the element borax, Quonoset hut design, which if you don't know what a Quonoset hut is, I didn't either. I had to look it up. It's kind of a upside down U. You've seen them before. You can Google it if you would like. It looks like kind of a prefab, very military kind of structure. Cryogenic freezers, and Proverbs 16, lines 18 to 20, which is the line about pride going before the fall. So, with those clues, I came up with an alien or UFO invasion theme. I thought the
Mm.
borax, which is in a crystalline form, or can be, that could be, maybe they're invading to get the borax. That's the element they want to power their ships, or it's something like that. Or he just wanted something that looked crystalline to use within the maze. The hut design, like I said when I was describing it, it brings to mind the very 1950s Air Force Base kind of prefab barracks idea. So immediately made me think of Roswell or Area 51. Cryogenic freezers, I thought, was kind of an obvious alien tie-in. I feel there's always
Mhm.
cryo freezers when there's aliens involved. They're scaling people and putting them in cryo freezers. And then the whole pride coming before the fall could be, the human civilization. We feel we're so proud and so mighty, but then we're humbled by the alien invaders. So my concept with that was that it would be a very kind of take on 1950s sci-fi, have a little fun with it. but a scarier version of that. You could do a lot of different alien designs. You could have the classic gray aliens. You could have some green aliens, like in Toy Story, but scarier. You would have reptilian aliens. So I think there's a good variety of places you could go with this. You could do a lot of different kinds of scenes. You would have the crash site. You would have the military base where the aliens kind of break out of. You could have them attacking, the small town in the 50s. You could have, then you're back on the mothership, so you're moving through a lot of different things. And that was my speculation. I thought it made sense when I really the hut design really cued me. I was like, this looks like an old Air Force base. So what ties in? And aliens and UFOs were such a big news story last year and may continue to be this year. I thought it made sense on the promotional side to play with that and do something fun, something different. And we saw last year with Exterminators kind of this campier horror that I thought was super fun. It had a really fun tone to the event, and I thought carrying that into a UFO maze would also be really cool. So that was my first speculation. Alvaro Stein, what do you think? Am I on the mark?
I think the more you described it, the more I do believe it could be something related to aliens, something related to sort of Area 51. Now, how exactly, if it's going to be some sort of IP or original concept, that's going to be where it's really going to take fold of deciding how they're going to take it. Uh,
I
as you
had
were
this
just,
as an original.
oh, it's
This
marked
is
as
one of
an,
my originals, yeah.
is your originals or one of his
Well,
originals?
it's going to be, in my speculation, this is one of their non-IP
Ah,
walkthroughs.
no. The more when I was thinking about it, the more I thought about it. This sounds more like the 1996 movie Mars Attacks to me,
Mm,
with the whole idea of cryo freeze and aliens. That's my first thought. However, I could be biased because I really like that movie.
it's a good movie. It's a good movie.
So it could be.
Now, if they do Mars Attacks, will they have a little mannequin with Pierce Brosnan's head on a dog?
If they don't, it would be quite a letdown.
Yeah, I mean, why even do it if you're not going to include it? And would
Exactly.
there be a yodeling scene at the end?
They have to have the music playing in order for you to defeat the
Yeah,
aliens.
you have to they missed on having the Metallica and Stranger Things last year. If they do Mars Attacks, they can't miss on the yodeling.
Exactly. Otherwise, how do you know when the maze ends? That
And I
should be
want
the
some
mark.
Tom Jones when you walk out.
There should be a grandma playing her yodeling music. Awesome.
But I
So
did think if they're doing an alien thing, I think it just to save money, I did think it would be an original for this.
it would make sense that they would want to do an original, especially because aliens themselves are not a unique idea. There's so many different takes on it, and knowing Universal, they're going to be something spectacular with the idea. So they definitely have a lot to be able to work with,
Yeah,
and the whole idea of mixing Pride before the fall, that is going to make me think that it's going to be something great, something where humanity does think that they're above it all and are being quickly humbled.
well, that's
But
also kind of why I said it in the 50s. So then we're kind of at the apex of American power over the world. But then these aliens come in and just wreck Area 51 or wreck Roswell or wherever they're landed.
mm,
And leaning on your point of there's so many ways to do aliens, that's how I also thought it'd be a fun original because there are so many interpretations out there. And an original maze, you could have a spin on all of them, just done in a scarier version.
yeah, it could be the whole idea of the little gray man,
Hmm.
or a 1950s version of humans in spacey looking costumes.
Yeah.
So that will be a very fun, campy take.
All right.
So I don't know if they'll do that though.
Yeah, it's hard to guess on these original ones. You're really just going to take shots in the dark. So the clues help a little bit, but that was my guess. Do you have one for these clues as well that you can do, or do you have your own order you want to go
Hmm. I think I'll go with the next house. I don't think I have any more based on this specific clue.
in? Did
I'll,
you have something for this clue? Was that your Mars attacks?
that was my Mars
Oh, that was
attacks.
your. Okay, so we were actually pretty aligned on this
It was
one.
my Mars attacks.
Okay. Now, were you trying to keep track of how many IPs were there last year versus originals and correlate that, or were you just scattershotting?
I was scattershotting because I
Okay.
figured you would be the more to be aligned with it.
I
And
was. I was. I think there were, off the top of my head, I think two or three originals, including Terror Tram. So it's an IP heavy event, and I think my list reflects that.
got it. All right. For my next speculation, well, looking at his clue that it was going to be something with a wheelbarrow, some kind of.
I have the clues written down. Let me get the clue.
Ah, okay.
So the clue he's talking about, Murdy said he researched a specific type of flower, rusted old wheelbarrows, a famous tree, and an old man's obsession. And then in a follow-up tweet, he said, "Yeah, it's about gardening," which may be sarcastic, may be a clue.
To be honest, my first thought when it came to that was the classic video game of Plants vs Zombies.
That would be an impressive translation. Plants
it
vs. Zombies rated R.
well, it has everything you want. It has wheelbarrows, gardening, and horror.
Yeah, put it next to the Angry Birds maze.
Oh, it could be the Angry Birds are attacking the zombies
Yeah.
now. But that was like my first like funny idea of what it could be. What kind of interpretation did you take?
Okay, I can tell you
Reading
what I
this
had for
first.
that clue. I thought this would be the Latin American maze because if you recall last year's, well, yes, it was last year,
It
last
was
last
last year.
month's news for December. Murdy announced on Twitter again that they were going to keep doing Latin American mazes in that Parisian courtyard space where they put the Day of the Dead Plaza. So we know there's going to be another Latin American maze coming back, and this year I think it's going to be the Chupacabra. And not only because that is the only Latin American monster I can name other than La Llorona, but mostly because of that. But I think the clues make sense because if you think about the Chupacabra, he's a rural monster, a cryptid. And you could see Murdy wants to set this in a ranch or a farm in Mexico, but he wants to be very place appropriate. So he wants to have the right kind of trees, he wants to have indigenous kinds of flowers. And then the rest of our wheelbarrow just makes sense for that kind of environment. And I thought the old man's obsession could be an old man who's obsessed with hunting the chupacabra and proving its existence. And this could give a new kind of twist on that Latin American maze because I thought the La Llorona maze and then the Monsters of Latin America we had last year, they felt like the La Llorona could have just been another segment in that Monsters of Latin America maze. It felt there was such a strong sense of continuity in terms of the way it smelled and the way it
Mm.
looked and how it just felt. I thought if you add a new angle onto it, this year you add that cryptid angle where you're trying to hunt the monster, it would give a very different feel to the maze that I think would help it not feel so samey year after year. And Chupacabra is a famous example of a cryptid. And maybe if it's successful, we could get a Bigfoot maze in a year or two, which would be incredible. Um, but I thought that would be cool. What do you think?
I do think that definitely the monsters from Latin America are will be making a comeback. I will say if they do focus on one monster specifically, the Chupacabra is a great monster to choose from because it's very widely known,
Hmm.
and the whole idea of the goat eater,
Yeah,
they're definitely gonna have a lot of fun with that idea of
yeah.
putting those kind of sound effects. Especially the whole smell factor that they
Oh,
really
yeah.
implemented last year. That's gonna be really what sets it apart this year for this maze. If they decide to do that, especially if you decide to like how does a farm smell
Yeah, not good. If
like?
you've been to Howling Horror Nights last year, you would know from a few different events.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're definitely gonna have fun playing with the smell factor this year, especially for all these farm related houses. Uh,
I feel like you can see going through the facade and maybe a small hallway, and then it opens up into the ranch scene. And there's just destroyed bits of goat everywhere as you walk through, and you have that smell and the voiceover of the old man telling you how the chupacabra stole my livelihood and now I'm going to hunt him down. It feels like it could be a big hit.
Now, when it comes to the actual scaring, do you think they're gonna focus heavily on the Chupacabra jump scares, or are they gonna have elements of the old man, maybe people that don't believe him, that what he's talking about?
Yeah, I think you would have to have more than just the chupacabra, so there would probably be some human and attackers. And they did that a few times last year where you were going through a forest scene and like the rescue worker would jump out and you're like, where is she? Where is she?
Hmm.
So I think they would do that with the old man as well if they do this, what I'm proposing.
Yeah, because otherwise you'd have a whole situation of Stranger Things like last year, where the only monster that attacked you
Was the
was
Demogorgon.
exactly.
You could have fun with it though, because the Chupacabra again has this cryptid, no one really knows what it is element, where maybe a few different looks of it appear. because you're never quite sure what it is. So maybe one's standing bipedal, and that could be a traditional scare actor. Then you have one that's on all fours. Maybe one's more muscular and one's more scrawny, different colors. So I think you could do different things with it to have variety.
Especially because if you think about it, he's supposed to come out at night when
Mhm.
mostly in rural areas you don't see what's out there. So they definitely could play around with the size, the shape, and the way the teeth and everything else about it.
Yeah. So that's what I had for gardening, for the gardening clues. What did you have for those?
I think for the gardening clues, like I said, it was a lot of because it was gonna be this was the one I was thinking might be the IP of Plants vs Monsters. Although I was like, there's no way it's gonna be Plants vs Monsters, but I just thought the
Oh,
idea
that's your
of
actual
yeah, that
speculation.
was the
Wow. Okay.
it wasn't actually Plants vs
I
Monsters. It was more of the idea of you're running through some kind of fields
all right.
and there's monsters attacking. And what's the classic monster? Zombies. So it's not per
Okay.
se
So you don't
Plants.
think it's pointing to anything too specifically at all?
No,
I think it's definitely not going to be Plants vs Zombies. So
no,
I give a
definitely
big
not.
thumbs down on that one.
But if they did, I would love it. It was a great game.
All right, let's talk about the last clue we have, and this one's very vague. Murdy said on this maze, the research alone was going to give him nightmares. He followed up by saying it might be the darkest, most disturbing, and potentially scariest maze he's ever done at Halloween Horror Nights, which would encompass every experience that's ever been done at Hollywood, which is kind of a big claim. He doesn't usually make a big claim like that every year. He's not that much of a hype man. It also was hinted by an insider that I follow on one of these Halloween Horror Nights forums that this was going to be an IP maze. It wouldn't be an original concept, and it would be exclusive to Hollywood. It would not be at Orlando, which may or may not be true. But this insider has a pretty reliable track record of leaking things out ahead of time. He's a clever leaker. He leaks things in such a way that the event won't get in trouble because he's very vague about it.
Mm.
But this was a speculation.
He's no Tom Holland, is what I'm saying.
Exactly, exactly. We could talk about leaks a little bit because the event has gotten in trouble. We actually will because one of my speculations will bring it up. The event has gotten in trouble with people leaking out what the mazes are going to be ahead of time, and sometimes mazes get pulled, which we hate to see.
Mm.
So on this podcast, we'll be a little sensitive of how we talk about leaks like that. So I had to think of something. What's an IP that could be very disturbing, but is would be at the event, so it's not so active in terms of there's a new film coming out this year, because if that was the case, they would want it to be at both coasts. So it has to be something that's semi-dormant. And where I landed was Hellraiser, which you may know the main character of Pinhead. He's the Cenobite. He's this ash white skin with the nail stuck all over his head. Um, it's a great film from the 80s. It's very gory, not gory in the Terrifier way of it is just going to gross you out. It actually kind of has more of a purpose, but it does lean into that body horror aspect that we don't see too much of at Horror Nights, where the plot is about a man, Frank, who finds this puzzle box, and when he solves it, the Cenobites come and they say, "We have such sights to show you," and they're all into causing pain that leads to pleasure. It's kind of a sadomasochism kind of thing. So they kind of torture you to death when you solve the box. But then through some machinations, he's kind of brought back to life, but he starts his life as a skeleton, and his lover has to attract men to the attic where he lives that he then murders. And each time he murders someone, he regrows more of his body bit by bit. So there's a lot of horror involved in this movie, of course. I'm not going to spoil too much of the plot. If you haven't seen it,
Yeah.
it is really a great movie. I highly recommend it. And it's 80s gore effects, so even if you're a little more squeamish, it's pretty clear that they're effects and it's not real, so you should be okay. But why I think it might be Hellraiser, like I said, this is not a totally dead IP. You know, it's still people know what it is. It's still kind of in that horror hall of fame. But the right situation, when you think of something that hasn't come to Horror Nights before, like Hellraiser or like Scream, if you're going to say, I think it's going to come this year, you have to have a reason. It can't just be, well, I really like Scream, so it's going to be Scream. So Hellraiser is an interesting situation with the rights. It's based on a short story by Clive Barker, who's a legendary horror author,
Mm.
called The Hellbound Heart. And he then wrote and directed the film of Hellraiser, the first Hellraiser movie as well. But he didn't own the rights to the IP until California passed a law a few years ago allowing writers to reclaim the IP and scripts they've written after I think about 25 years. So this is why, by the way, if you've noticed that there's been no Nightmare on Elm Street movies or no Friday the 13th movies for a while, it's because of this law. The Wes Craven estate reclaimed the rights to the original Nightmare on Elm Street film a few years ago, and the rights to Friday the 13th have kind of been in limbo because there's been a lot of tension between who owns the rights to the Jason Voorhees character, because the writer of the original film says, well, Jason pops out of the water at the very end of it, so I own the rights to Jason. And the rights holders to the rest of their franchise say no, because that's just a little boy Jason. The big, hockey mask, muscular Jason, that's a separate version of the character. But Hellraiser's in a bit of a different situation because Clive Barker wrote and directed the first film, so he owns that first film, all that intellectual property outright since 2021, the very end of 2021. So really, this is only the second year that he's had control of his property again. And you could see a situation where the previous rights holders were not interested in Horror Nights, but maybe Clive Barker's more interested in it. Murdy also tweeted out that he had a super secret meeting with someone in LA for a super secret property with a super secret person. I thought maybe that's Clive Barker. Maybe Clive Barker was in LA. His agent tells him, "What do you think about this Horror Nights thing?" He's like, "Oh, that's kind of interesting. Let's get the guy over here. Let's talk to him." So Murdy flies out from Ireland, and they have their secret meeting. He's like, "Yeah, let's do Hellraiser this year. It'll be super fun." And maybe you get some original Clive Barker designs in there. I mean, Clive Barker, he's a brilliant guy, very, very intelligent in terms of writing horror stories. So I'd love to see it come to the event. Obviously, it's one of my favorite horror movies. And I think it fits the bill of being super scary. The research is going to give me nightmares. You imagine if Murdy starts looking up, other designs or something Cenobite related, and you can get to some pretty gory stuff in there. So that makes sense there. That's where I landed. What do you think?
I think that definitely has a good potential to come into effect, especially like you said, just thinking about how to make all those effects, how Cenobites can come into play. Just the
Hmm.
look of Hellraiser
Oh yeah,
themselves is quite scary.
yeah.
So I can definitely see it, and it would be a very scary maze, definitely
Oh, yeah,
for
for
sure.
sure.
I, I'm excited if that comes to fruition.
Oh, I'd be very
I
excited for
would,
this one.
I would, yes.
If based on if all my speculation came true, this would probably be my most anticipated maze.
Yeah, that would be like my number one maze that I would want to go into, especially because it hasn't been done.
Hmm.
It's Hellraiser, so you
Yeah,
can't go wrong with that.
it's one of the last few classic horrors that they haven't done yet.
I wonder though, like how they're all going to implement it, which is probably why he's saying it's giving him headaches just doing all this research. So that makes sense. It
Well,
completely
I
makes
think there's
sense.
enough horror characters in this one because you have the four main Cenobites, so you have Pinhead and his three lackeys. We're all pretty scary designs.
Hmm.
And then you also have the Frank character who starts as a gory skeleton and regrows. You have a few different versions of him popping out at you as you go through. I think it could really work. I think it would be an amazing maze. Great property again. Love the film. So I'd be excited about this one. So what did you have for this Give Me Nightmares clue?
I think for mine it was like as you mentioned, it was Scream.
Hmm.
I really love the idea of you don't know where the killer is. He's coming from inside the house. It's terrifying in the sense of what your home, which was supposed to be your safe space, your safe haven, where everything around the world didn't affect you, is has been invaded,
Hmm.
and now you're running inside your house and you don't know, do I go out, do I stay in? What's worse? It's the whole idea of the devil you know in a way, because you know that inside the house there's one, but you don't know there's another one
Yeah.
going
And
outside.
that's always the twist, is there was two.
Exactly.
Scream's an interesting franchise to pick because it was dormant for a while, and it's kind of come back now. The last two Scream movies did rather well, and most of the cast I think is out for Scream 8, so we'll see if that actually or Scream 7.
Seven.
The
Yes.
next one, most of the cast has dropped, so we'll see if they actually make that or not. I'd go see it if they did. I wasn't that blown away by the cast and the new ones. I thought that was the weakest element, so I'd be happy to go see a new Scream movie. In terms of Halloween Horror Nights, Scream has quite an interesting history, actually. It did come to the event. I don't know the years off the top of my head, but it came to the event for a terror tram one year with Scream for Your Life. And the plot was you were going to go on to the set of a stab movie, but of course something's gone wrong and the Ghostface killer's after you as you walk through the set, which makes sense for a terror tram. It was a good idea.
Mm.
I don't think it got great reviews. I think it was back then. I don't know. It was before we were going to the event. I don't know what the
Oh
terror
yeah.
tram was like back then. And then it was supposed to come to the event as a proper maze a few years later. And it got to very late in the game, and then the maze had been constructed, and all the proper scenes were there, and the scares were there, everything was ready to go. And at the last minute, the right holders pulled the rights, and they repurposed it as a purge maze. So if you go look up the first purge maze they did, and this might be out of Florida actually, it's tricky to remember off the top of my head, but the first time they did a purge maze at Horror Nights, if you go look at the video, you'll recognize this is the kitchen that Drew Barrymore was in. They have the scene where the girl gets stuck in the garage door. It's all these scenes from Scream.
Scream.
It's just with Purge characters, and they put graffiti on the walls to try to cover it up and make it look like the Purge is happening, but it clearly was meant to be Scream. So there is a little bad blood between the Horror
Scream.
Nights and the Scream rights holders. I think it's Dimension Films. I'm not sure why that bad blood exists, but it kind of does. But again, I mean, money talks. So if they say we want that cross promotional event, maybe we're feeling a little shaky because we've lost most of the cast. We want to keep Scream relevant. Maybe we do Horror Nights this year. So it is possible. It's always
It's
possible.
I would say it's basically a little bit more possible considering that Scream 7's release date was pushed back because of the writer's strike, so they
Hmm.
definitely would want to keep it relevant in people's minds. Um, so especially considering that the whole Hollywood time period of September to October is a good time period to keep people to bring them back to the idea of Scream, which will be released the following year. It'll be a great cross promotional
Yeah.
experience, and it's I would say it's in Scream's benefit
Yeah.
that they allow this.
I mean, the two classic horror films that are really the white whales now that they've done Child's Play that are left out there are Scream and Hellraiser. And there's a few more that are more modern that I think I know I'm going to talk about them today. But it's interesting we both landed on one of those as
Yeah.
what this is.
Uh, Hellraiser, I think the only thing that might not be allowed is just the whole their look is very sadomasochist, which parents might not be
Maybe
so
they would
hot
because
about.
they really toned down anything sexy at Horror Nights. They used to go in and they had go-go dancers at the front, and actually Universal executive, someone above Murdy, acts that. So they anything like that has been really cut from the event.
Mm.
Um, but I don't know, the Cenobites are not sexy in that way, unless you're really into that.
Well, their face
So
is
they
not,
could get away with it.
but their attire was
They might have to
bordering the
redo some
lines.
of the costumes. Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe. Okay, so that's it for all the clues. So from this point on, I'm now making guesses based more on what we've seen from the event in the past and what I think makes sense for other property holders in the area. And the first one I have kind of in that realm is one that we talked about rather at length in the last episode, which is Gremlins. And I'm not going to reiterate most of what we said about Gremlins last episode, why we think it would be such a great maze for the event, but I will remind you how they made a lot of these mini animatronics for the Chucky maze last year. And that's not cheap to do. And this event loves to reuse something. If it makes an animatronic, it's going to use that a lot. We've seen the same animatronic they made for the American Werewolf in London has been used every year since
Yep.
then. I actually kind of rather it's fun to go through and try to spot it every year. So these mini animatronics will at least for one more year they're going to come back. I'd be shocked if they didn't come back in some form. And Gremlin seems to be the most natural fit if you want to do a different IP with that idea of a lot of little guys.
Mm.
If Gremlins doesn't come, I think we're going to see another Chucky maze. It could be a new Chucky maze that's using some of the same poses. You know that TV show is still ongoing, so they could use more material from the later seasons. We also saw a few kills in that Chucky maze that were borrowed, I think, from like Child's Play 1, but you could do more Child's Play 2, more Child's Play 3 or something. At
Seed of Chucky.
Seed of Chucky wasn't in there at all.
No, there was a family portrait.
That's true. The Glenda was there, but there weren't like the kills from Seed of Chucky
No,
were
no,
there.
they
So
weren't.
there's definitely more you could do with Chucky, and have it be fresh. Of course, we could also just see them do the same maze, which I wouldn't be too upset about because I did like it. So I would do it again if it was there. It wouldn't be as exciting as a new experience. They could also do like a minor plussing where say, okay, so three-quarters of this maze is the same, but like Holidays in Hell, there's a new section at the end. Maybe one or two new rooms at the end would be fine. But I think one of these I think is almost certain. We'll see something. What did you have?
I definitely think that Gremlins is going to be the one that they choose, especially because considering that they're having their 40th year anniversary this year,
Mm,
they really love to do movies with their anniversaries. So Gremlins seems to be fitting the bill for that. The whole animatronics with Chucky definitely. It's really easy to transition from one puppet to a different puppet.
It's a lot easier than making a whole new skeleton.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't know, the Gremlins just have this persona about them that they're just funny, crazy beings,
Yeah.
which is in a
I
sense what
think
Chucky
I
is.
think Gremlins would be a good draw for the event. People like Gremlins. It's a semi-dormant IP, I would say. It has a new TV show, but it's for kids on HBO.
What?
Yeah, they've been trying to pivot it more that way, which might push it away from being a Horror Nights event. They might say that's too mature. But I mean, we've had Ghostbusters at the event. We've had mazes that aren't leaning into the horror and the gore so much. So I think Gremlins could fit very snugly to that category. We've also seen Warner Brothers took a break from being at Horror Nights because they were trying to do their own event for 2 years.
That's fun.
Horror Made Here, which we attended, and I think well, at one point we'll have an episode about it because we love that event. But last year they had Evil Dead Rise, which is another Warner Brothers property, was at the event, so it seems like Warner Brothers is back at the game. They also put their Conjuring had a maze at Six Flags Magic Mountain Fright Fest. So it seems like they've reopened the door to licensing out their properties to being at these Halloween events. So it's definitely possible.
Yes, I can see now the HBO show called Gremlins: Secrets of the Mogwai. That is very kid centered
Yeah,
considering it's
it's
animated.
animated. Yeah, and it's animated in a way that's not adult
No,
animation.
it's
Yeah,
childlike animation.
maybe your kid will like it if you have kids.
I would say watch it first, then let your kids
Yeah,
then decide if
yeah.
it's kid
And
friendly.
they definitely pivoted more towards Gizmo's cute, and we're gonna make a franchise around that. Trying to get some of that Baby Yoda money. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but Baby Yoda looks a lot like Gizmo. It's a bit of a ripoff. Or was Gizmo ripping off adult Yoda? I mean, who can say at some point?
Well, let's let's go with
All
the
right.
next
So you
one.
also had Gremlins.
I had
I'm up
Gremlins.
to my fifth speculation maze now, which is one we accidentally talked about in the news segment. It's Five Nights at Freddy's.
Five Nights at Freddy's was a smash hit last year.
It was.
It made a lot of money
I
because
think was that the highest grossing horror movie last year?
I think it was Five Nights at Freddy's, especially for Blumhouse. It was their
Yeah,
highest grossing
definitely for
movie.
Blumhouse. It was a big hit last year for Blumhouse, and I mean that was Universal movie, I think.
It was
So that's a big hit. This is a very popular franchise with Gen Z. If you're not Gen Z, you might not even know what it is. I know I was talking to people about it who are a little older, and they're like, I don't even know what this horror movie is. Well, what are you talking about? Five Nights at Freddy's, but it's huge with Gen Z. So just some background. This was a video game that was released around, I want to say, 2011, 2012. A very simple video game. The creator actually, he's a Christian guy. He was developing Christian games, but he wasn't very good at designing characters. People gave him comments that your characters are really creepy. They're creeping me out. He's like, well, instead of getting upset, I'm going to use that note and make a horror game,
oh
which he did, and it was a runaway success. It kind of occupies that space of The Ring for our generation, where The Ring was PG-13, so a lot of younger children saw it like, oh my god, this is the scariest thing I've ever seen. 'Cause you had never seen a real horror movie before because you
yes,
couldn't because it was rated R. And Five Nights at Freddy's is a video game. It's not a gory video game, so kids could play it, use it without their parents knowing it was
of
a horror
course.
game. So it was their kind of their first experience with horror, and it was huge in kind of the influencer community where like PewDiePie and Markiplier were streaming it, and those were super popular with the kids because you get those. It has a lot of jump scares, so it was the big reaction from the streamer. Kids love
Community,
that.
yeah.
And it has kind of the way it tells its story is very much you have to piece it together. The little clues in the game, they have to watch like 10 YouTube videos to actually figure it out, which keeps engaging the kids.
The
So it was
youth.
right. So it was a huge hit. The movie, of course, was a huge hit. They had the costumes, kind of the props from it, on display in front of the Bloomhouse show last year, and that was a runaway success on social media. They got a lot of traction.
Hmm.
So I would be shocked if this one doesn't come.
Yeah, this movie was on a budget of about $20 million, and it grossed about 294.6 million
Yeah,
worldwide. That's that's
that's a
amazing.
hit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a hit if you've ever made one. And the fact that it's creepy, it's animatronics. It reminds me of a very haunted Chuck E. Cheese.
that's kind of the idea is that it's set in a haunted Chuck E. Cheese ripoff, Freddy Fazbear's
Yeah,
Pizzeria. But at night the animatronics come to life with the ghosts of the dead children who were murdered in the back rooms, and they come at whoever.
Yeah,
I'm not totally sure what the plot's about, to be honest, but it's haunted. It's a haunted Chuck E. Cheese.
yeah. It's gives a the darker version of Night in the Museum.
Right, right. So I'm not sure how they'll manage having big, bulky animatronic costumes doing jump scares at you in a maze, but I feel like just having this at the event is such a must do for them that they'll figure something out. And also, I think because it sets in haunted Chuck E. Cheese, I think having a Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria pop up in the lower lot where they had like Surfers Pizza last year, and that's a no brainer as well. It's a slam dunk.
Yeah, especially because this movie also did feature Matthew Lillard, who was in the
Mm,
Scream movies, and he was also a lot of people's favorite character in the Scooby Doo movies as Shaggy.
mm.
So a lot of people are really looking forward to this house if it was made. But again, with these huge animatronics, the logistics of how to like make people scared. Is it going to be a jump scare with someone in some kind of costume, or is it going to be more of animatronic scare where the animatronics going to pop out at you?
Yeah. I mean, we just watched the Krampus maze for the last episode, and that was another one where it has a big, bulky costume. And because of that, I thought all the Krampus scares were less effective than like the toys or the elves coming at you. So I don't know what they'll use to mix it in, but I think it's coming. Get ready for Five Nights at Freddy's. Yeah.
For Five Nights of Scares.
And yeah, I haven't seen the movie, I haven't played the game. If it gets announced, I'll do both to talk about it properly in our preview. So
Okay.
that's it. So far, we actually think we lined up pretty well on a lot of these.
I think for these, it's just because they just make sense in a
Yeah,
way.
a lot of these make sense. And now we're on to six, where I think this one I don't think you'll have. I'm saying Exterminators is getting promoted from Terror Tram to Full Maze.
You are correct. I did not foresee that. To
I
be
think
honest,
for a few reasons. I think first of all, that Larry Larva character they created, I love Larry Larva. I think he deserves an encore.
mm,
Such a strong. I thought the idea behind that Terror Tram was so interesting. The grown-up bugs and they're exterminating the people. It's such a fun idea and it was a good Terror Tram, but I think there's still more to do in that world. You can also kind of fill in some of these gaps they had last year where there's a good idea, not great executed. If we could take a return to Spider Alley, but have real spiders this time, that would
oh,
be great. If you have that kind of that human bait idea, but really make that more of a bigger set piece, I'd love to see that. They have most of the costumes I feel like can be reused because it was such a variety and
yeah.
maybe you add a few masks in there so you have some spiders was really the big lacking one, but you can reuse a lot of the effects and I'm not going to be disappointed because I thought they were great and in a new environment. I wouldn't mind seeing them again. I think it could be kind of a holidays in hell situation, another maze that ends with a Z for no reason, by the way. Holidays,
Yeah.
exterminators, where it's kind of an outside scare zone that becomes a full maze. And I mean, Holidays in Hell had like 3 or 4 years of the event. It was huge. I think Exterminators could be the same thing. I think in Orlando they have more of these icons they call them that are these original characters that are headlining the event every year. And I think if we keep seeing Exterminators, you keep seeing Larry Larva, we already have Hollywood Harry who comes up every now and again, and the Terror Trams. We could have a few characters like that, then you could start having a cross from it. I would love to see a Terror Tram in the future of Hollywood Harry versus the Larry Larva, where Larry Larva is trying to exterminate Hollywood Harry's Halloween clown posse. That would be great.
The Halloween posse was very fun. I love that maze. That was the thing. That was the first year we went, and that was the one we experienced. I had a great time with that one.
Yep.
The only thing this Larry Larva definitely gave me the ick. Going throughout, it just when
You're
you
gonna
first,
swipe left on Larry Larva.
I would swipe left, super left, like mega left. As which is intended.
Yeah, it was on
It's
purpose.
very
It's supposed to
intended.
be a little gross.
Like it's supposed to be gross. It definitely gives you the very high ick factor. I will say that if they were to make them transition to a maze, it would work in their benefit because having too much of an open space, I think, was a detriment to the experience
Mm,
of the Larry Larva. I do feel that if they had a bit more tighter fit, a little bit more darker, the bugs and all the other elements to it would be way scarier.
yeah. And I think the strongest element of this exterminator's concept was Larry Larva himself, and being in the open space kind of limits how much you can do with that. If you're enclosed, you can have them over the loudspeaker all the time talking to you, and that's what you want in an exterminator's Larry Larva's experience.
Especially because they'll be able to actually do a little bit more of crowd control. Because when you're just in a conga line and you can
Yeah, the Terror Tram
see,
always becomes conga line, in my opinion.
yeah, you see what's coming up, it kind of takes back a little bit of the experience.
Yeah,
And so
yeah, I
the
like the Terror Tram, but I think Exterminators was so good it deserves to be promoted to full maze.
mm, I hope it's not because I don't like the ick,
All right,
but if it
so this is
does,
one you didn't have. So what was next on your lineup?
I think for mine was Beetlejuice too.
Oh, I have that coming up. I
Ah.
have that coming up. What do you have another original?
Nah, for the originals, my idea was that you talked about it was the monsters of in America kind of deal. Let's see.
Yeah, what was your Monsters of Latin America?
My
We've done
monster,
mine.
my monster of Latin America was gonna be. It was. I wanted to really do one that wasn't well known. Like
Mm.
they did the one with. Remember the bird beast one that was.
There's three different bird beasts of last year. Yeah.
Yes, if they can do some kind of a thing with just focusing on those three because we don't really know them that much.
You want them to return?
I want them to return,
Okay.
but more fleshed out, more than just one quick snippet like, oh, you walk 3 feet and it's over. I want.
Which of the three bird people do you want to see more of?
I forgot their name, but it was the biggest one
The one
that
at the end or the one in the middle?
the middle,
Okay. The big animatronic.
the big
Okay.
animatronic.
She was that was a very short segment.
Yeah, that was a very short
I
segment.
didn't even realize that was a separate segment from the first segment when I went through it the first time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very big animatronic, so I would definitely see them wanting to reuse it, considering how much time and
Yeah.
money they probably spent on it. But I would want it to be a little bit more fleshed out, a little bit more of the story of like
Hmm.
what is this beast? What is its what does it want?
Yeah.
And how do you defeat it or anything like that
And what's
sort of
the
thing.
early worm?
Yeah. So that's the monster that I
Okay.
would want him to focus on, just because of like I know the stories of the chupacabra of La Llorona. I want a new monster from Latin America that's a little less known.
So you prefer the ones that you learn about in the maze, whereas
Yes.
I went for ones I already know. That's why I like it.
No. Yes.
All right, so we're on opposite ends on that. That's
I,
interesting.
I like to learn. I mean, you kind of already, if you know about it, you can anticipate what's
Oh, it's not
coming.
as scary.
It's not as
It's not
scary.
as scary. That's true.
So when you're learning about it and you kind of like take a quick pause to like hear what the story was being said in a loudspeaker or read something, it gives you time for the scare actors to actually come out and scare you because you're not anticipating. You're like, I'm reading, I'm learning. I'm not expecting to be scared right at this moment.
All right, so you mentioned Beetlejuice 2, so I'll skip my next maze. I have Beetlejuice 2 as my maze 8. So I'll skip, we'll come back to maze 7. So I do think Beetlejuice 2, this is one that I just have labeled as the Warner Brothers maze because I think there's three ways it could go. And I'll tell you why. I think Beetlejuice 2 makes sense in terms of synergy. I think Beetlejuice 2 is lined up to be the biggest kind of I won't say it's strictly horror, but it's definitely in that kind of the spooky horror realm. If anything horror related, it's set up to be the biggest movie of the year. I'm kind of excited for it. I like Michael Keaton. He's been doing good work. I even liked him in The Flash, which no one else liked The Flash, but I thought it was pretty good. And people like Jenna Ortega. So it is set up to be big. And like we said, Warner Brothers has shown they're willing to return to these events. Now, there is some history here between Horror Nights and Beetlejuice. So in 2020, Beetlejuice was supposed to he would have been one of the mazes that we have, and
Oh,
that event
really?
was canceled. And if you
Why?
remember, if you remember in 2019, they had 80s nights in the lower lot, and Beetlejuice appeared as kind of an MC on stage at the DJ stage.
Yes.
And that was kind of the precursor, and then he would have appeared in a maze the next year. So in Orlando, actually, they had a enclosed. They didn't call it Horror Nights, but to keep the rights for Beetlejuice active, they had to produce a maze that year. And they did do one that was it was limited in terms you have to wear a mask. There's plexiglass between you and the scenes. but that was done to keep the rights. And then we would have had Beetlejuice in 2021, but I believe it's hard to keep track of what left for what reason. I believe this one left because they printed some merchandise like T-shirts with Beetlejuice on them. They didn't
Mm,
sell them, they didn't release them to the public, but they did print them before they had total permission from the rights holder to do that, and that really caused some anger, and they pulled the rights. And I don't remember what Beetlejuice became. He became something else. It wasn't the Scream situation where it was last minute, so it became a whole new house.
yeah.
So there is a little bad blood between whoever holds the Beatles because there's Warner Brothers, of course, there's also producers involved who have egos, and in Hollywood, these egos get very large, and they can be they're very easily damaged by little things like that. So it's possible that whoever owns Beetlejuice is like, no, I hate the Hollywood event. We'll do it in Orlando, but we're not going back to Hollywood. So we might miss Beetlejuice. It also might be. I would rather it be Beetlejuice one than Beetlejuice two.
Yes.
But they might say you can do Beetlejuice 2. We can't do one. You missed the boat on that, but you're getting Beetlejuice 2 to promote the movie. I would still like that, still go through the maze. It'd be fun to see Beetlejuice at the event. Um,
Yeah.
but if there is bad blood, I think they'll try to get another Warner Brothers property in there because there are two that we've missed at Horror Nights. The first one I think would be more likely if Beetlejuice isn't happening is the Conjuring universe,
Mm.
which we saw again at that Universal event, not Universal, excuse me, the Warner Brothers event, Horror Made Here. Both years of it, they had a Conjuring walkthrough in both years. And that was really when the Conjuring universe was at its apex. I think Conjuring 2 had just come out. The first Annabelle had just come out. And now it's kind of a franchise that's still active. I saw Conjuring 3 came out, I think last year. I thought it was pretty good. There's Conjuring 4 will be coming out next year. The Nun 2 did rather well last year. That was a Conjuring movie, but it doesn't feel like it rules the horror world like it used to. But still, seeing a Conjuring walkthrough where you go through and first you could be in the house from the first movie, and then you go to the Enfield house in the second movie. By the end of the maze, you could do maybe two in one, or maybe you go through the Warren house and you go through the museum. That's more like the Annabelle Comes Home movie. It's more focused on just all the monsters at once. There's a lot of ways you could do it. It's another one of these white whale properties that people have been wanting for a long time. That just hasn't come. And if Warner Brothers is open to it, I think they would jump on it. And they could say, we're going to do two Conjuring mazes this year just to keep the franchise fresh. We'll do a retrospective Conjuring Universe maze. And then next year, you're going to do a Conjuring 4 maze that's just strictly for the new movie coming out. If they don't do Conjuring and they're still looking to do Warner Brothers, the other Warner Brothers white whale that we've missed is It with Pennywise the Dancing Clown. There's another one that they promoted heavily with their Horror Made Here event and therefore missed Horror Nights entirely. And this is a less active IP. Of course, it was only two movies. It's not a whole franchise, but it is coming back. They have a Welcome to Derry TV show. It's going to be premiering on HBO in 2025. I think it looks at Pennywise's attack. He comes back every 20 years or so, and takes place in the 60s. So it's the Pennywise appearance that predates the movie.
Well, you could say it's almost four movies: the two original and the two
And
remakes.
the what's that guy's name?
Skarsgård?
No, the original one
Oh,
from. I'm having such a brain fart. I know this guy's name. He was in Rocky Horror Picture Show. He's incredible. Tim Curry.
Tim Curry.
Tim
That's
Curry.
right.
The
That's
Tim
right.
Curry clown.
I love the Tim Curry.
That'd be hilarious if they did the Tim Curry clown instead of the Skarsgård it. I would be there. I would be there day one for that maze.
We
But
did.
I think it might be a situation where they say, we have the new TV show coming out in 2025. We're going to wait a year and then we'll start pushing this at Halloween events to get some buzz back around it. But you could also say, maybe it's coming out early 2025. We want to get the buzz started now. So we'll do an It maze late 2024. Horror Nights would make sense. I don't think Stephen King is a big fan of these horror events. Stephen King's a bit funny in terms of what he likes his properties. Like, I know he hates video games. He'll never license anything out to a video game. But the way that the rights are controlled for these things in terms of who wrote the book versus who wrote the movie is kind of funny. So I don't think they need his permission to put it in these events.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, Stephen King is also not directing the TV show, which is one. I think I read there was a reason why Skarsgård was not going to
Mm,
be it in that realm. So there's a lot of different takes. There's a lot of different ways it can
yeah,
go.
the rights are weird.
Yeah, fun. fun stuff with rights.
So what did you have about Beetlejuice 2?
I think they really wanted to get the whole idea of people trying to get back into the Beetlejuice universe, so using it as promotional anticipation. Um, a lot of people, I will say, are gonna hear Beetlejuice and not think Beetlejuice 2 per se.
Yeah.
So they're probably gonna use that to like really bring it back to people's minds because it's been a while since Beetlejuice has been out, and Beetlejuice has also been in the realm of people's minds as of late, and which within the political realm, with the past couple of months for reasons. So definitely, it has come into people's minds. Beetlejuice is definitely a classic movie. I love the idea of Beetlejuice himself because he's a very wonky
Such a
character,
fun character.
such a fun character. And now the idea that they're going to Beetlejuice 2 is supposed to take place in Hawaii, which
Are
is
they still
very
doing that? I remember in the 80s the sequel was going to be Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian.
yeah.
I'm not sure if they're doing that for Beetlejuice 2.
Mm. Well,
They might
whatever.
be. I don't know.
I,
I don't know much about Beetlejuice. So I know Jenna Ortega's in it because she's Tim Burton's new Helena Bonham Carter.
yes.
She's just gonna put her in everything he does now, it seems. And Michael Keaton came back, and I love Tim Burton. I go see every Tim Burton movie that comes out still.
Yeah.
I even like Dumbo that he did.
I still think that they're going to try to figure out a way to bring it back into people's minds and really push out this Jenna Ortega. And
Yeah, she's big with the Gen Z.
where it actually takes place is still up for debate. But I still think if I'm not mistaken, it's going to be supposedly going to take place in Hawaii, which is going to be a very different take.
That would be fun. I'd go see
Yeah,
it. Yeah, I mean, I'll go see it kind of regardless. Honestly, I like Keaton and Burton and Beetlejuice.
I like Beetlejuice, so I'll watch it,
Yeah.
but we'll see how it goes.
All right. So now I'll circle back to Maze 7, although this is the final maze that I have set up for speculation, which will be the same amount of mazes we had last year. Then we'll touch on the Terra Tram and shows at the very end. So I loved last year's Last of Us maze less because of the content. I just love that concept of the video game maze.
Mm.
I'm not as big of a gamer as I used to be. I used to be way into it. It was such a different experience of it felt like you were the main character going through a level in the game. I thought that was so cool. I'd love to see them continue that. And I have kind of two games that I think would be good for the event for different reasons. One of them is this is a bit more, now I'm getting into this is more of what I want than I think. But I have reasons. I have reasons. So, my favorite game probably of all time is Dead by Daylight, which is this multiplayer horror game where one person plays as the killer and four people play as survivors who have to escape the killer. It has a lot of original characters, there's probably over a dozen. They all look very distinct. They could all be their own monsters in a maze, and a bunch of then original survivor characters as well, who could fill that Joel and Ellie role we saw last year. If you have a recognizable characters kind of leading you through the experience, um, it also has a lot of part of the reason the game's been so successful. It's lasted, I think, 8 years now. I think it's going to be its eighth year is because it has a lot of famous slasher. It has Michael Myers, it has Leatherface, it has Freddy. It's characters you can play. In the maze, I don't think that would be true. It would be only these original monsters that they've created. But again, there's plenty of that in there. And they call it the Hall of Fame of horror and gaming, in the same way that I think Horror Nights is the Hall of Fame of horror in real life. So I think there's some good synergy there. Now, why I think this will come to the event, I think in the next 3 years, it's a lock to come to the event. The company behind Dead by Daylight, Behavior Interactive, has been really pushing Dead by Daylight in non-video game spaces. They just came out with a board game that's super fun. I highly recommend if you get a hold of it. There is also a Bloomhouse movie of Dead by Daylight in the works. It'll come out either towards the end of this year or next year. My question is, will they do, like we've been talking about this whole time, do you kind of pre-stage the movie at Horror Nights and say you're going to do a maze to start building hype before the movie comes out, or do we do it just the same year and it'll be tied in to the movie? So it could either be a Dead by Daylight video game maze this year to kind of get more awareness and build hype for a movie next year, or do you do we're going to do a maze based just on the movie next year when the movie actually comes out, which would be less exciting for me because I think the game has so many different environments and so many different scary characters that would function really well as a maze. I think within the next 3 years, I think it will come in some form. Might be this year, might not. I think if it's not this year and we're going to keep on the video game theme, which I think they should because it was super fun and super different, Resident Evil, I think, makes the most sense. I think that's probably the biggest video game horror IP out there. It's pretty easy for them to do zombie effects, but there's also a lot of unique zombies in these Resident Evil games that they could incorporate. They have like the one who is like the brain, the big tongue, then for the giant nemesis zombie, pretty famous.
Oh, that was a great monster.
Yeah, there's a lot of great monsters in these
Yeah.
Resident Evil games, and like you also have those iconic characters. You would have Jill and Chris and Leon and Ada to guide you through the experience. It'd be super fun to see some actors playing them, playing the video game versions, not the Milo Jovovich movie versions that were a little weird, not very accurate to the
They
game.
were very far
Yeah,
off.
very off the game. You could base either say we're going to do this based just on Resident Evil 1. I mean, you could do 3 years of Resident Evil. You say we're going to
Mhm.
Resident Evil 1 the first year. Next year we'll do Resident Evil 2. Then we'll do Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 3 is not as good, so it would go straight to 4. And it also gives you the first game set in a mansion, the second one set in a city that's been having a big zombie attack, the fourth one set in this small European village and a castle. So it's a good variety of environments to move through, good variety of scare actors that come out and get you. So I think Resident Evil will be a great option if they want to keep doing these video game things. And Capcom owns Resident Evil. I mean, they're very open to licensing Resident Evil out wherever it wants to get licensed. I don't think it's an impossible IP for them to get. It's been at the Japanese Halloween Horror Nights many years ago. They did a Resident Evil maze, and that's been its only appearance. But I think this could be a good year for them to bring it back.
I would say I would love it if they would come in. Resident Evil. I watched. I will say I watched the movies first,
Yeah.
and then the video games. And then when I was playing the video games, I was like, wait, what's going on?
It's very different.
It's very
Where's
different.
Alice?
Yeah, I was like, where is Alice? It was a very different experience of, but I am also a very aficionado with zombies. Zombies have a very dear place in my heart. So if it were to come and if it were to be that's the maze that they choose, that's the one I'm running to.
Yeah. I could very easily see them say they have that black box where the Walking Dead attraction used to be. You say we're gonna have 3 years, three Resident Evil mazes in there, and they'll all be different. Reuse a lot of those zombie effects, and I think it would be great.
Yeah, the Resident Evil, top notch.
All right, so that was my last speculated maze. What was yours?
I think for my speculative maze, it's keeping in theme with video games. It was Silent Hill.
Oh, okay.
Silent
That's interesting.
Hill,
We're on the same wavelength.
yeah, Silent Hill has very particular monsters in
It
it,
does.
so they definitely could play around with that.
I'll say the monsters in Silent Hill are scarier than the ones
Oh
in
yeah.
Resident Evil, like the Pyramid Head and the nurse thing that comes at you.
Hmm.
Definitely, it's a very scary game. It's very psychological.
And the nurse one is gonna be very. The only reason maybe they might not do it is gonna remind people a lot of the weekends maze,
Yeah.
which is, but it also I would say it would be another reason why they would make it because they'd be like, oh, we already have a nurse character similar in style. We can just bring them in to quickly do for Silent Hill, and Silent Hill is also a very scary game, so it makes sense why they would choose to do this one.
I would say Silent Hill is probably the second biggest horror video game after Resident Evil,
Yes.
pretty comfortably. I'd be excited for Silent Hill. Have they done? They did Silent Hill the movie, I think,
Yes, they did a Silent
a
Hill the
long time
movie,
ago.
which I think it was the early
And it was like
2000s.
2007.
Yeah. So they definitely could have. They have space enough now to
But the
do a
game is better.
maze. To do a maze of the game, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and you still have those iconic. You have the James character, who I know they have. Is it Rachel? Who's the other one?
I think
Sybil? No, it's not it.
mm,
I know them from Dead by Daylight more than I know them from
their
Silent Hill.
actual
To be
game.
honest, because they all guest star in Dead by Daylight. That's where I learned them.
It's Heather, Eileen, Richard, Angela, and then you start getting into I think James, Alyssa, and Henry are
Who was the
the
one in Resident Evil in Silent Hill 3? Was the one?
Silent Hill 3. Let me see.
But I mean, that would be a strong one. I mean, it's a creepy environment. You're in a small town. What's interesting about Silent Hill is they made this for the PlayStation 1, and the PlayStation 1 could only render so much area around your character.
Yeah.
So as a limitation of the game, they shrouded the whole town in fog. But that's so much scarier than being able to see the whole map at once. You're never sure where monsters are going to pop out at you. And Horror Nights is such a big fog machine event. They probably buy more fog juice for Horror Nights than the whole rest of the country combined. So there'd be great synergy there. Like we said, the monsters are terrifying. The only thing I would pause with on Silent Hills, it's a very psychological kind of game where the characters are always going through their own internal trauma and it manifests in the town of Silent Hill. And it would be tricky to kind of get that across in a maze experience where something like Resident Evil is basically just an action game. The characters are fun, but there's not much depth to them. So the story is a little trickier, but you could also just have it be just a scary experience. It doesn't need to have that extra element.
I mean, the one way I think they could do that is if they had the voiceover kind of experience as you go through the
Good.
different sections. If you were to be playing different characters in
That'd be
different parts
interesting.
of it, so that's one way that they could do it.
You would definitely want to see, for any of these video game mazes, I would want to see two or three characters that I know from the game in the maze as kind of, oh, we're going this way now. Oh, we have to get out.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, stuff like that. Like I thought that was, I really loved that in The Last of Us last year. You kept seeing Joel and Ellie as if you were in the game with them.
yeah, it definitely gave you that experience of oh, it's a very POV kind of
Yeah,
experience of this. But yeah,
yeah, I'd be excited for that too.
that was my last one as well for what it could be.
Okay, so that's I mean when you speculate, you always make a strong maze lineup because it's also taking what you personally want is always going to come into it.
Yes.
If we're right, I think it would be great. It would be really great. We'll see what it actually turns into. It might be a dud. There's always that chance. Not every year is equal, but regardless, I'm sure we'll go and have a good time. Let's touch briefly on the shows and the Terror Tram.
I think for the show where
There's two
Waterworld
shows.
is,
There's the Waterworld show. If we assume it's going to be the same venues, there's the
yes,
Waterworld show and the DreamWorks Theater show, which is where they had the
Blumhouse
Blumhouse
last year.
last year. Yeah.
Yeah. I think for the water show, it's gonna stay the same as
Yeah.
Purge.
I think it'll be the same exact show.
Yeah, the only thing that might be different is that last year it was a senator, I believe, was the main villain. Um, they might change it to kind of like Mr. President kind
Mm.
of, but I feel like that'd be
And the election year might be a
yeah,
little dicey.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't like that it's going to still be Purge, but I was trying to think what other horror franchise exists that could have attackers coming out on jet skis, and it just doesn't. I thought maybe you could do like 28 Days Later, where they're fast zombies, so it's more of a zombie attack, but then they won't be on jet skis,
No,
and they won't be using like the grappling hooks and stuff. So it's probably going to be if they came up with something original, that would be super cool.
yeah.
Or if they do like an alien attack there, that would be cool. I think it's just going to be Purge again.
It's probably
It's
more
going to be
likely to
Purge
Purge.
until the crowds dwindle, and then they'll refresh it.
Yeah,
For the theater show, I think a repeat of Bloomhouse is likely where they'll say, here's the props from this year's movies.
yeah.
And it's going to be a teaser trailer for Megan 2 instead of being for Five Nights at Freddy's. And Megan will come out on Danzig. And I think that's likely. I do have another possibility here because you'll notice that neither one of us had Universal Monsters maze in our lineup.
Yeah.
We probably should have mentioned this in the news segment, but Murdy had a tweet about because I would have had the creature from the Black Lagoon
Yeah.
because he's really the last one they haven't tackled, and he came out and he said if I'm going to do creature, he said it's not happening this year, and it would be its own maze because that's a big effort to do. And I think I would love to see creature next year. I think people love the creature from the Black Lagoon. I think he's no one's like favorite Universal monster, but he's in everyone's top three.
Yeah.
And I think people would really like to see him. And to kind of keep that idea of the Universal Monsters fresh, I think they might do a Universal Monsters show in the theater where
Oh.
they do maybe they bring out some really that'd be cool to see really old props
Yeah.
in that entrance space and do a little clip show of all the different you can hear Frankenstein's monsters coming to life in the background.
Exactly.
Uh, and then do a clip show of
Actually, that's the water boat.
okay, a clip show of everything, for these 30s and 40s movies, and maybe like some from the new Invisible Man or tease the new Wolfman movie that's coming out this year. I think that could be really cool. I would prefer that to Bloomhouse, but I think more likely we'll just see Bloomhouse again.
Yeah. It'll be an interesting take on that one. But
Yeah,
again,
they'll do Bloomhouse, and then
yeah,
Megan will dance again. It'll be pretty much the same show.
I will say if you're taking a normal ticket and and you have to spend 2 hours waiting.
Not worth the wait.
Not worth the wait.
Well, we'll review it. We'll tell you. Check here first before you go.
Yes.
The last thing is the Terror Tram. I'm guessing we're going to see Hollywood Harry make a reappearance. It's been a year or two since we've seen him. They like him. I like him. He's fun to stay fresh. I think they'll carry over that theme they had last year, which we saw in Chucky and a little bit in Exterminators of the influencer. I think this will be Hollywood Harry's turn to come after the influencer crowd. I think that's going to be the thing.
I really loved Hollywood Harry. It was the first one we walked through when we started going to Hollywood Horror Nights. I definitely loved the and that one. I feel like the clowns were more active
Yeah.
than anything else since. I don't know why they started cutting back.
Well, I think part of the reason they can do more with the clowns is because the makeup is just makeup.
Yeah.
So you have a wider range of vision. It's easier, I think, for the characters to breathe, so they can be more expressive.
That makes more sense. That it's horror makeup, but it's just makeup versus
because they're just
mask.
clowns. They're like bloody clowns.
Yeah.
And I love Hollywood Harry. He's fun. It's fun to have a character that's just tied to the event.
Yeah.
And we love the event enough that we have a podcast about it, obviously. we like having that special characters too.
No, especially loved it because the clowns tend to follow you more instead of just being locked to a location. A lot of the Exterminator ones, they were just locked into a small space and didn't really follow you as much. The clowns definitely followed a lot of people. It was fun to watch people get scared from the clowns, and I don't know, just it's been one of my more favorite Terror Tram shows of it.
And I think we both really enjoyed the influencer battle theme where Chucky and Larry Larva were killing influencers. Even though we are influencers now, it's just a fun idea. No one really likes influencers. No. So
not even influencers like
we don't even like, we hate ourselves for doing this podcast. Exactly. But I would be proud to be killed by Hollywood Harry next year if they put a little Undead Ed mask on someone. But I think that's a fun theme. I think Hollywood Harry should get on the fun. Did you have anything different for the Terror Tram?
No, I didn't really think of what it could be just because, I don't know, I was thinking like, how could they top it off this year?
Yeah.
And looking back, like, they've been doing a lot of repeats. So
they do. The Terror Tram is also somewhere where they like to reuse because their main attraction is really being on the sets more so than the terror element of the tram. So it's somewhere where I think they feel they can skim back a bit. And I think what we speculated would be of several expensive mazes for them to produce. So then you say we're just going to reuse the Hollywood Harry props. I think that's a plus for them on the business side.
The one thing that I would love it if they started implementing is a little bit better crowd control. Just because the Terror Tram, like I said before, it's great, but it's better if you don't see it coming.
It's better if you pay for the really expensive ticket and you get a private tram.
Yes.
But we'll talk about tickets, I think, when the tickets go on sale.
Yeah.
We'll let you know which one's the right for your group.
Yeah, let's see how much it increased this year.
Yeah, 200% probably, just like the grocery store.
Oh. Yeah. Now we will be undead.
All right, and I don't really have any speculation on the food other than we mentioned, I think, if they do Five Nights at Freddy's, which, I mean, they will. I think it'll be Five Nights at Freddy's pizza downstairs.
Yeah, it's going to be pizza.
I'm not sure who will get the bar this year.
If they do Chupacabra, maybe we'll have some goat meat.
Goat taco.
Yeah, goat tacos in the, like, that Hispanic section area. So that's going to be a way that they could implement it. Let's see, what else? What other themes could they do with food?
If they have like an ice cream and then there's little for Hellraiser, like a vanilla ice cream with little pretzel sticks stuck all into it. That would be pretty good. That would be pretty good. But it's too early to talk about the food. We'll have a food episode at some point too.
It's definitely a little early, but it's always fun to think about. Like,
well, unfortunately, here in Frankenstein's laboratory, it's almost lunchtime, so food's a bit on the brain. And I think that does it for speculation.
Speculations is over and done with now.
All right, I think that's it for the episode. So we'll leave you with the outro unless you have anything to add.
Stay scared.
Thank you for listening to this production of the Hollywood Horror Nerds. We know you have many options for your listening entertainment, and we're glad you chose us. Find us on Instagram at Hollywood Horror Nerds, on X at HW Horror Nerds, and on YouTube at Hollywood Horror Nerds. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite alternative podcast site to ensure you don't miss next month's episode. And until then, stay scared out there.